It's Dendrobium nobile flowering season, one of the happiest times of year. And I thought this is an excellent time to get to all of those questions that you've been asking. Let's get to answering these. This time I've managed to categorize them nicely, hopefully, so that I don't get myself too lost. So let's get straight into answering all of these questions for you. I've divided these questions up into general care, watering and feeding, growing and flowering, repotting and media, dormancy and rest period, and pests and problems. So let's go through each section one by one and help you get the most out of your dendrobiums. One of the most frequently asked questions is, what is the best way to look after your Dendrobium nobile? This is quite a broad question and there's a lot of detail that can go into it, but just to give you the very basics, remember these guys like that winter rest period. So cooler temperatures, less water, much less water. In fact, sometimes you can even withhold watering completely during that winter period. Also, you can stop feeding them during that winter because they're basically dormant. And then as you start moving into spring and summer, then of course you can ramp up that feeding again and your watering, because they do like quite a bit of water and feed during those active growth periods. They actually enjoy quite a wide variety of temperature ranges, so that's not going to cause generally too much. But if your temperatures don't cool down enough during that winter period, you may have a problem getting them to bloom, but more on that later. And for more detailed care instructions and a culture sheet, go check out that Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box down below. Ed's posted up a wonderful article there on Dendrobium nobile itself and has listed everything in point form, so it's easy to follow. And one of the other commonly asked questions is, how much light do they need? Dendrobium nobiles like lots and lots and lots of light. And preferably, the more light you give them, the better they're going to grow. Even if they do start to look a bit yellow and sickly, that's always a good sign that they're in the right light conditions. In winter, if you can give them full sun all day long. That's generally what they would get out in nature. They're generally growing in deciduous forests where all those leaves have fallen off during winter and then all that sun is blaring on them all day long. This generally helps the plant perform at its best. And now follow on to how much light is, should I keep my dendrobium indoors or outdoors? Generally, they do grow better outdoors. They like that good air movement. They like all that strong light. But if you are able to still provide them with those conditions indoors, especially with these newer hybrids that are coming out, you can grow them very successfully indoors too. Remember, light is going to be important. So what then is the ideal temperature range to keep them in? Dendrobium nobiles generally like fairly warm temperatures during their growing period. So anything from around 24 all the way up to the mid or high 30s, they can accept really easily. In winter, they do like their temperatures to drop slightly. They can actually take temperatures near freezing point. As long as there's no frost, then they're fine, because frost will damage the leaves and the pseudobulbs eventually if the frost is thick and deep and strong enough or often enough. But yes, cool temperatures are fine during those winter periods. In fact, they prefer to get those cooler temperatures during winter, and those day and night fluctuations are also important to get the best out of your plant. How much humidity do they need is also another frequently asked question. They're actually very forgiving as to the humidity requirements. Anything from around 40% humidity all the way up to as much as 80% humidity. But remember, during those periods where the humidity is high, ensure that you have enough air movement. These thin leaves can be susceptible to fungal attacks, especially during those high humidity periods. And in those lower humidity periods, ensure that you are supplying your orchid with enough water that it can be hydrated well enough. So that leads us beautifully onto the watering and feeding. How often should I water my dendrobium? Dendrobiums like an excellent draining media. So depending on how you've got it planted, if you've got it mounted up in your tree or on a mount, and depending on what your temperatures are like, then you can water your orchid every day, especially during that growing period, during that spring and summer. If you've got it in a pot with some media, depending on how well drained your media is, how fast it drains out and how quickly that media dries out inside, you can water it anywhere between perhaps once a week to twice a week, because really we don't want to give them too much water in a contained space, because that will rot the roots. These roots are used to being out open on the trees, and they don't like being in a moist, damp space for too long. So allow them to get wet and then dry out. Also, remember, I've told you during that winter period, give them a winter rest from watering. Again, depending on your humidity, as long as your pseudobulbs aren't wrinkling, you can withhold water completely for the whole of your winter period. But as soon as you start seeing a little bit of wrinkling on your pseudobulbs, then it's time to give them a little bit of a spray. Don't go watering them heavily, just give them some misting occasionally, just to ensure that the pseudobulbs don't shrivel up. There I go, I already answered it. Should I reduce watering in winter? Absolutely. As I said, according to your temperatures and your humidity levels, sometimes you can withhold water completely. Our ones that are out in the trees do not get any water from us whatsoever during that winter period, and they do beautifully. So what type of fertilizer should I use and how often? My dendrobiums, I always use organic fertilizers. Well, with the majority of my orchids, I use organic fertilizers all the time, and then use the synthetic fertilizer perhaps once a month that's got a little bit of added auxins in it to help with that lateral bud initiation. But a lot of people will give their orchids high nitrogen during that fast growing period, in that spring and summer period, and then give them a high phosphorus feed as it starts heading into autumn, so that it's ready for flowering in spring again. Remember, you're also withholding your feed during that winter period. Do I need to stop fertilization before flowering? Also, again, I answered that prematurely. Yes, absolutely. Stop fertilization before flowering. Your flowering is going to happen in early spring, and you're giving your dendrobium a winter rest. So this is going to allow it just to rest and build up all its energy for its flowering. So no feeding, because your plant is fairly much dormant at that point, and it's not going to be absorbing any of those nutrients, and you could start causing fertilizer burn on your orchids itself because you're withholding watering. So withhold the water and withhold the fertilizer completely for that winter period. As soon as you start seeing your buds starting to open again, then sure, go ahead and start fertilizing again. Some people will only start fertilizing once their flowers have fallen off their plant, but as soon as those buds have formed and you can see they turned into flower buds themselves, then you can start feeding again. Growth and flowering. Okay, let's just leave that till the end. Repotting in media. When should I repot my dendrobium? The best time to repot your dendrobium is when all these flowers are finished. It should still be in the middle of spring or springtime that you're repotting your orchids. All your flowers have started to fall off and die. Then you know this is the best time to repot, because your plant is beginning already to send out those new roots. Those new little root initiations have just started, and that's when you repot. This is going to give your orchid the best chance at just carrying on growing without even realizing the repot has happened. At any other point, you are putting too much stress on your plant, and that's going to set it back slightly. What type of potting media is best? This is also a very complicated issue, because it's all got to do with your climate, how you grow your orchids, how much water you like to give them, how much feed you give them. These all work into what media should you use. But always with the dendrobiums, if you're putting them in a media and not mounting them, Remember, it has to be a well-drained media. So large bark pieces, lava rock, uh, pieces of brick, anything like that is an excellent media for Dendrobium nobile. Also, by providing it with things like lava rock and brick shards and things like that, you are giving some weight to the pot, because we see how large these plants can get, and especially if you're staking them up to keep the flowers upright and not putting them in hanging baskets, then they need that weight of the pot, otherwise they'll fall over really easily, being top heavy. So a well-drained media. Let's not get ourselves off track here again. Okay, what should I use, bark, moss, or something else? Bark is an excellent media for Dendrobium nobiles. The bark, those fir bark or pine bark, generally has a lifespan of between anything from 2 to 5 years, depending on the quality bark you use. You want fairly large pieces. You don't want that fine bark that you're going to be using for your Phalaenopsis. They want nice large bark pieces to allow for that fast drainage. Sphagnum moss is going to be very problematic for your Dendrobium nobiles unless you are able to manage that watering very, very carefully, because that sphagnum moss holds so much water, and these really like to get wet and dry out. All these roots rot really easily. So again, if you're starting to get confused as what media is good for that, check that Buy Me a Coffee link. There's also an excellent article down there in about how to choose the correct media for your orchids. Okay, how do I manage keikis, the baby plants, when repotting? These little side shoots off your plant that start getting the roots that come off these old pseudobulbs. How do you manage them? If they're mounted in your trees outside, often you can just leave them. They'll reattach themselves to the branch, providing a huge big plant or orchid on that branch. Otherwise, you can remove them, but also do it in that spring period. This is going to be the best time to do it, when you see that new root initiation happening again, or some nice strong new root growth on the ends or tips of those roots of those keikis. That's the perfect time to do it. Remember to do it also when you have enough root volume. Don't go take it off when there's very little root volume for the size of the keiki itself. Allow the root volume to expand before removing it. That will give you faster, better results. If you take it off with a little bit of root volume, then the plant is going to be set back slightly. You'll still get good results in the end, but it will take a lot longer to actually really flourish into a large plant again. So timing of removal of the keikis is a key factor. And now we get to dormancy and rest period. This is quite important for your dendrobiums. So, does Dendrobium nobile need a winter rest? Absolutely they do. Dendrobiums really do need that winter rest period. They do go into a dormant state during winter, and if you start feeding and watering them at that point, you are going to start causing problems. You'll start rotting your plant. You'll cause all sorts of fungal and bacterial diseases in it, and you might just lose your entire plant. And then how do I tell if my orchid is going into dormancy? With Dendrobium nobile, it's relatively easy. You'll start seeing not all of them are completely deciduous. Some of them are completely deciduous, depending on the intergeneric hybrids or interspecific hybrids they can lose all their leaves. But most of them will keep a certain amount of leaf volume if the conditions are right. If, of course, you have very extreme conditions during that winter period, they can lose all their leaves but still be perfectly fine. So how do you know it's going into dormancy? You'll notice the root growth stop. You'll notice there will be no fresh growth coming in from the base of the plant itself. You'll just notice an overall slowing of the growth of the plant. But that's only if you're watching it carefully. Often you'll see just by the dying off of the leaves and knowing that it's coming into winter that your plant is probably going into dormancy. Should I stop watering completely in winter? This we've answered already, but I'll say it again and I'll say it 100 more times. Don't water your Dendrobium nobile during winter. If you do start seeing a little bit of wrinkling or shriveling of your pseudobulbs, sure, give it a sprinkling. Don't overwater it. Just give it enough of a misting so that you can stop the shriveling of those pseudobulbs. Otherwise, leave it alone. Do I need to keep the orchid in the dark during dormancy? This is something that a lot of people do with their bulbous plants, their tulips and things. They'll take those tulips, remove them from the pot, and put them in a dark spot until they get closer to spring again so that they can replant them out. And that bulb goes completely dormant and it needs the dark, otherwise you start causing problems. With orchids, especially with Dendrobium nobiles, when they go dormant, often they need the light. Often they'll need more light or higher light conditions than they will during their growing periods. So don't go put them in a dark spot. So no, don't put your Dendrobium nobile, if it's gone into dormancy, into a dark spot. In fact, rather move it closer to the light source. Put it closer to your window, give it more light, brighter light, and that will make it happier. Pests and problems. Why are the leaves of my Dendrobium turning yellow? There can be two main reasons for this other than deficiencies. One is high light conditions, very high light conditions, and your leaves can start, instead of being this greenish color, can be more yellow, can go more that sort of color. If it's that color, there's nothing to be worried about. That just means it's in a higher light condition. As long as your plant is still looking healthy, it is fine. Another reason that they could be yellowing is that it's heading towards winter, or it is in winter, and the climate conditions have started to get heavy for it, so it's starting to lose some of its leaf volume during that dormancy period, or getting ready for that dormancy period. So for those situations, the yellowing is not going to be a problem. The other forms of yellowing can be from nutrient deficiencies and cultural mistakes. So be sure that you understand what you need to know about that. We have covered those topics in videos previously. We'll try and drop those links to those videos in the description box below. Why are the leaves of my Dendrobium dropping off? Again, if it's during that autumn period or in winter, often that will just be due to the dormancy period. It's getting ready for dormancy, or it's gone into dormancy, and those leaves are no longer needed. They'll then undergo senescence and drop off. So that's often not something you need to worry about. If it's during the growing season, then you have another story. Then you need to look into why those leaves are dropping off. But if it's autumn and winter, generally nothing to worry about. If your pseudobulbs aren't wrinkling and shriveling, you're fine. Those leaves are going to drop off anyway, so don't worry too much. How do I treat for pests like scale and spider mite? This is going to be relatively easy. Scale and spider mite, generally you can use something like a neem oil to spray over your entire plant. That will treat both of them. If you're using chemical pesticides, you'll have to check what the active ingredient is and which of the insects that it is specified as being the correct ingredient to actively eliminate those pests. So just by giving it a general spray over with your neem oil or any of those eco oils generally does the trick for both scale and spider mite. Remember, inspect your plant early, keep an eye on it all the time. If you catch these infestations earlier, it's a lot easier to treat. And now, why are the roots shriveling and going brown? With these Dendrobium nobiles, depending on which roots you're talking about, if they're the roots on the keikis and the roots are shriveling and going brown, it often means your humidity levels are too low and you're not misting or watering frequently enough to overcome the deficiency in humidity, and more waters or moisture is being drawn out of the plant than you're able to supply it with. If it's in the roots, you've got to check that you haven't got too much moisture there and you've started to kill the roots, but then your roots generally aren't going to shrivel, they're going to become that mushy brownness. So if they're shriveling and browning, that generally means they're drying out. So often it means your humidity levels are too low and your temperatures are too high and you're not watering frequently enough. Okay, and why or what causes the canes to wrinkle? So what's going to cause this wrinkling of the canes, this wrinkling and shriveling? It's going to be dehydration. Dehydration can either be caused from being too dry, not watering frequently enough, if you've got high temperatures and low humidities and you're not giving enough water, it's going to cause the wrinkling and shriveling of the pseudobulbs. But also, again, overwatering can do the same thing, because you can kill all the roots through overwatering. The roots will die and rot, and there'll be no way for your plant to be able to absorb all that moisture back into those pseudobulbs. And they're using all the moisture out through transpiration, and they'll start to wrinkle again. So just take a look at what you're doing and how you're looking after your orchid to see what is going wrong. Now for that all-important flowering. This is the reason that we get these babies, because otherwise they can look a bit of a mess. Not that I don't enjoy them when they don't have flowers, because for some reason I just love these plants. I don't know if it's because they're so hardy or because they're so beautiful. But let's get to growth and flowering. How do I get my dendrobium to flower again? A lot of people buy their dendrobium orchids when they're all in flower in those nice pots with those upright spikes, and often they're not able to get them to flower again. They manage to keep them alive, keep the roots growing healthy, but never get any further flowers. It's because often they're not either giving it that winter rest that they need, they're not allowing the temperatures to go low enough to help force flowering, because these guys really need a big dip in those nighttime temperatures to help force that flowering. They need about a 15-degree temperature change between your day and night during winter to help force those flower buds. This is what matures off the canes and allows those flowers to be formed. So if you're growing indoors, you're going to have to either find a cooler spot or allow for air conditioning to cool the room enough that you can start getting those flowers again. Also remember, if you're not giving them enough light, especially during that winter period, those flower buds may not form. And if you're watering too frequently during winter, what you are going to get is you'll get a lot of keiki volume instead of getting flowers. So those are going to be your main points as to why you're not getting your Dendrobium nobile to reflower again. When is blooming season? Blooming season is now. These guys like to flower in springtime, that early spring, the end of winter, early spring. This is when the majority of them will burst into bloom. But remember, there are so many different hybrids nowadays. There's so many interspecific hybrids. Like these guys and these Hamana lakes. These Hamana lakes actually only have around 30% of their lineage from Dendrobium nobile. But still, they've got Dendrobium nobile there, and they like to be treated the same way. So they all flower at different times now due to what it has been bred with. So you can get extended flowering seasons all the way from early, or not early, all the way from almost late winter through to almost going towards summertime now, depending on the variety that you have. How long do the flowers last? The majority of these Dendrobium nobile flowers will last for approximately a month. So you get about 4, possibly 6 weeks out of them, depending on the plant and its specific genetics. But if they aren't lasting as long, it could be things like your humidity levels are starting to be wrong, or they're drying out too quickly at this point, or they're getting rain at a point when the flowers are coming, and this can also help shorten their lifespan. Check for insect attacks and things if they're also not lasting too long. Okay. Why isn't my Dendrobium blooming? This is the thing that everyone cries about, and I think I just answered that a little bit earlier. Why is my Dendrobium blooming? Perhaps you were watering it during winter. Perhaps you weren't allowing that day-night fluctuation during that winter period. Perhaps you've been overfeeding it through that winter period. Perhaps you weren't giving it enough light during winter. So those are going to be your 4 biggest reasons why your Dendrobium nobile hasn't flowered for you. How do I cut off old blooming spikes? That's the easiest thing in the world. You'll see the spikes coming off right by the edge of the cane there, and you can just cut them off like that. Or the other thing you can do is rather just let them die off by themselves slowly. What they're going to do, they'll just die off and brown off. You can remove the flowers when the flowers have finished and leave that little brown spike on. Allow that to die all the way back and then cut it off. But often they'll just break off by themselves at some point as they dry out too far. Because if you do it that way, you're less likely to cause that open wound that I just did over here that may need to be treated with something like a cinnamon or something, just to ensure that we're not getting any fungal infection or bacterial infection in, especially because for us now in spring is our rainy, cloudy season, and this is our fungal season. So we've got to be extremely careful at this point of time that we don't leave any unopened wounds, any open wounds untreated. Can a cane flower more than once? 100% it can. That's one of the wonderful things about these guys is these canes can flower again and again, year after year after year. That's why you never cut off these old pseudobulbs until they get to a specific point. And what is that point, you ask? When they look like this, when they truly are dead. That's the only time that you should be cutting off your pseudobulbs, because at any point those old pseudobulbs can produce more flowers again. So don't just go cutting them off thinking you're doing the plant a favor, because for one, you're not. They store lots of energy that can be used for the plant during its growing cycles, and 2, you can get more flowers the following season from it. And it looks like I've covered just about all of those questions. If you have any other questions or questions that I haven't asked or questions that you think I didn't answer properly, drop that down in the comments box below. And if you find any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.